What up? This is a next-gen tarot reading. It's very personal. You should be on a page where this video is embedded. I have not created the page yet, but I suspect it'll be easy to find on nextgentarot.com, and it's probably gonna have a picture of a card with RoboCop and some particular design and writing elements on it. The back of the card from the original deck, the Model and Cards deck that I put together last year, the first deck that I put together, very fundamental deck for me, is the Next Gen Numerology Tarot card number 13 from the Model and Cards deck, and the key phrase to associate with the number 13 is "I leave it in their hands," which, by the way, today is the 2nd of February 2016, which I'm going to tell you some things that you may know already, but I'm also going to keep that in mind if you're already familiar with a lot of my next-gen tarot and numerology processes. I'm going to talk as if you weren't right now. So, February 2nd, 2016, that'll be 2016-0202. If you put the, what I call it sort of the primary number, because you can look at the number of the day, the number of the month, the number of the year, and there's the number of the year, if you do it next gen, if you do it regular, it'll be 2016 would be 2 plus 1 plus 6 equals 9. But you're using a base 10 number system, 2016-2016, that adds up to 9. But if you do it with the 30 base numerology system, that adds up to 6. If you divide 2016 by 30, you've gone through so many cycles of 30. Just like with 11 and 12, you've got through one cycle of 10, and then you've added 1. That's 11. 12, you've gone through one cycle of 10, and you've added 2. 22, you've gone through 2 cycles of 10, and you've added 2. So when you're doing 2016 and you go, well, that doesn't go over a cycle of 10 if you do it that way, because we're used to using 10 base, but because of the 30 base is so important for my numerology, the numerology for the year, while I acknowledge at the same time that I acknowledge the 9 that results from the 2 plus 1 plus 6 equals 9, I certainly acknowledge, and sometimes maybe even go, I'm not sure if I give it a little bit more priority, but the number of the year, if you divide it by 30, it'll have so many cycles of 30, and it'll leave you with the 6. So if you, what I was going to say is what I sometimes consider one of the primary numbers. If you look at 2016 as a 6 and or a 9, then you've got the 2 for the February, and the 2 for today is the 2nd of February. So you go, let's start with the day. You got 2 plus 2 is 4, the day plus the month, and then you got either 4 plus 6, which would be 10, or you got 4 plus 9, which is 13. If we have those would be the 2 primary numbers that I would consider for this date, the combination of both day, month, and year, both in the next gen and in the conventional, so to speak, quick way to add the numbers. So I mentioned that because it so happens, I didn't plan it this way, but it so happens, and I don't know if you explored my thoughts about what people call coincidence and synchronicity, but what I noticed that the back of the card uh, is the number 13 in the numerology, which the phrase associated with the number 13 is "I leave it in their hands." And excuse me, I noticed, oh yeah, 13 is one of the two primary numbers for today if I did my math right. Frequently I don't do my math right. But yeah, 2 plus 2 plus 9 would be 13. When I say the back of the card, you need to understand that the model and cards deck is not designed to have a back, and for the most part it's not necessarily designed to have an up or down or a sideways. Which brings us, which is a good segue into going back to the Robocop card. The what I'm calling the Robocop card, which is the 3Y card if you use the game code, but you need not, if you're strictly sticking to, well, okay, let me not get into the game code right now, but let's look at from a simplified perspective. Let's look at the Next Gen Tarot card. I said that it's a segue to talk about up and down and so on and so forth in terms of the Robocop card, because the Robocop card has a very stand-up and vertical element to it. This is not one of those cards that at first glance you realize, wait a second, which side is up? Our human brains are trained that if you look at this card, there is a right side up. But then, of course, immediately you realize, wait a second, there's things that are written vertical and things that are written upside down, and so on and so forth. But because of the way that our brain is trained, this looks very much like an right side up card of somebody firmly standing. Okay, now I said that this is and when I mentioned the back of the card is, if I would have drawn it the other way, if I would have drawn this card from the deck, and actually, hold on. Anyway, the point is that the back is not the back. It's something to keep in mind when I'm using my techniques for drawing a card from the deck or choosing a card from the deck. The primary thing is the face of the card that I see, whether it's up, down, left, right. Like I said, those are all relative. I do take into consideration the back of the card if it's a card that's printed on both sides, especially in this deck. But I do want to emphasize that the primary thing is, while acknowledging the significance and the presence, if you will, of the back of the card, the face of the card that you choose for the purpose of Next Gen Tarot readings is what I tend to focus on. Again, while acknowledging the fact that the back exists, and the direction in which you choose it, whether it's by a random draw or because you're looking at it, you can see the things that I there's other parts in nextgentarot.com where I explain the whole process of choosing a card, and my main two approaches, and I have other approaches, which now is going to get into a segue also about the fact that I said that this is very personal. This particular card is for a very personal reading. But I was going to say that regardless of how you go through the process of choosing a card for a Next Gen Tarot reading for yourself or for somebody else, I do it mostly for myself, and I think that's important to do it for yourself. But you could again, I'm stressing you could have it this way or that way or that way, and I address some of these things and some of the basics things that I explain, and we're gonna get into this pretty deep, or at least to some extent, in this reading. Now, I said that the segue between this being a very personal reading and the fact that he's standing strong, RoboCop is standing strong. But the personal aspect is the not so much my personal aspect, but the personal aspect of doing a next-gen tarot reading is actually what I wanted to start with at the beginning of this conversation. But I don't do an outline for these kinds of things. Some other times I do, but I'm going with the flow. But at least I'm glad that I mentioned that it's personal, because ultimately, well, there are a ton of things that you can appreciate, enjoy, or find beneficial towards interacting with the cards. The one of the primaries, if not the primary fundamental thing that I do together with tarot cards, next gen tarot cards, and tarot cards. I use mostly next gen cards, but I use regular conventional tarot cards too. But one of the most fundamental things that I do, if not the most fundamental thing that I do, is self-help. And you can ask any psychic, tarot reader, and so on and so forth. When you go to a psychic or a tarot reader, you've got a situation that has to do with love, with wealth, with work, with family, with your problems and with your wishes. And I was a little bit hesitant to get into my personal stuff, ironically, because I'm not like RoboCop. Actually, you know what? That doesn't make sense right now. So let's skip that. But I was somewhat hesitant. There's other sides. There's another side to me that puts everything out there, which is not like RoboCop. If you search my 4,000 things that I have online, it'll take you. By the way, it'll take you. I calculated. If you were to read and listen to everything that I got online, and you were to do it 40 hours a week, it'll probably take you something like, it used to be approximately 9 months. I think now it's close to a year of, and sometimes I get mixed up with the numbers. I remember that I used to think it was kind of like getting a degree, but I mean the amount of time that you'd spend to get a 4-year degree. But yeah, no, I think that it's something in the neighborhood of 9 months to a year if you were to do it 40 hours a week. And that I'm very much unlike RoboCop, because I get so fucking personal. You can look up my ass. No, I don't quite have videos where you can look up my ass. Although out of respect for people like Larry Flint, who is considered a scourge by a lot of conservatives, but he wanted to be able to publish porn, and he kept talking about this freedom of expression. So sometimes, almost out of respect, I'd want to show you a fucking shot up my ass, but I don't. I have a few semi-erotic fetish things that are kind of hard to get to. But on the whole, when I say that I lay it all out, I don't mean. It's almost like I'm the opposite of RoboCop in a lot of ways, in the sense that I'm beyond an open book. I show myself my blemishes. I do that on purpose, and so on and so forth. There is no armor. So that's one of the first things that I noticed when I picked this card. I thought, oh no, that's not me. I can't do that. I don't want to have an armor. I don't want to have an armor because I believe in I'm against the absurdity of everybody's false pretenses of theater. And we all have to look this way and talk this way and so on and so forth. And we have this facade. Everybody says it. Oh, we all have this facade, but everybody supports it with their actions, not with their wishes, but with their actions. I'm somebody that does, by his actions, shatter or at least provoke or challenge the facade all the time. And furthermore, I believe in always being able to share the true human nature of yourself. So that's quite the contrary of the way Robocop is. On top of that, as far as this is a card that has to do with intimate relationships for me. And on top of, as far as intimate relationships, which has been the biggest or one of the biggest crosses of my life, love relationships. With love, the last thing that I want to do is have an armor. So when I got this card, which, as you should be guessing by now, has to do with my relationship with women, we're gonna get more technical about, is this about love, or is this about women, or is this about intimacy? But the minute I saw the armor and the rigidity and the protection involved with this card, it's like, that ain't me. I'm gonna choose another card. Then I've gone through a ritual where, I mean, I'm free to do what I want anyway, but I feel more comfortable, as I explain elsewhere. I'd said okay to see before I drew this card, because okay to see stands for okay to change. C as in the letter C. There's times when you draw a card that you're like, no, I refused this card, and it helps if you've already prepared yourself to say, you know what, I'm gonna feel comfortable about changing this card. Maybe refusing is not the right term, but uh, as a matter of fact, I wanted to. As a matter of fact, I wanted to say no, choose another card, but then as frequently happens. Excuse me, I'm gonna roll a cigarette. Keep in mind, as I've said a number of times, that it's a lot more complicated. Things are a lot more complicated than, oh, it's good for you to smoke or it's bad for you to smoke. The metabolism in people's lives are very complex, and there's times when something is bad for you, and there's times when something is good for you. And if you're, the more you get in touch with yourself, you understand that some things may be considered bad, but there's a time and a place in your life when the benefits outweigh the pros outweigh the cons. You could say that about anything from water to Satan. Satan, for all I know. There's always pros and cons. Okay, so granted, with my dictionary, I do make very well studied suggestions about what would be good and what would not be good, in principle, in theory, if we're going to start a society from scratch. But there's also, what I'm talking about is something else right now, which is that when it comes to stuff like food, for example, and a lot of other things, not just food, it's excuse me. My bad. It's silly to say, oh, wine is good for you, wine is bad for you, coffee is good for you, coffee is bad for you, organic food is good for you, organic food is bad for you, GMO food is good for you, GMO food is bad for you, taking a walk is good for you, taking a walk is bad for you. There's these generalizations are generalizations. The specifics of your particular metabolism, your particular emotional state, and that not only in that moment, but maybe in that 7-year cycle, is going to bear more upon that specific ingredient than any kind of generic statement could make. And right now, for me, even though I frequently struggle with it, tobacco is good for me. So I truly mean respect I truly mean respect for you if you, you know, believe that tobacco is bad for you, and I don't mean to make you uncomfortable or disrespect you, like I said, but I'm gonna smoke it. So I roll it myself. I usually don't buy cigarettes. I buy tobacco and I roll it. And I used to be all freaked out. No, no, I don't like when people would roll joints in Italy, and they don't do it the American way. They mix tobacco with hash usually or weed, and like no, 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 no tobacco, no tobacco. I was like a religious fanatic, brainwashed against the evils of tobacco, and it took me years to finally realize, okay, don't be. Expand your mind and understand what I just said. I told it to myself. It took me a long time. Now, I've done a little bit of a tarot reading in the streets, but even with that, very, very little. Maybe if, if I've done it 15 times, yeah, that's something like that. Maybe I don't know. It could be a little more, it could be a little less, but and a little bit of tarot reading for some, family or friends or something like that. But like I said, this is very real. This is about you got a problem or you've got a wish, and in a simplified way, I look at it like this: if you draw a quote unquote random card, which you can do with complex rituals that I suggest through the about page on the website. Whether you quote unquote draw it randomly, I don't believe in random, but that's a figure of speech, or you actually choose looking at the card, as you're saying, this is the card that I want. If you haven't looked at the about page, it's about this next gen tarot reading thing that I do is fundamentally about you want to choose whether it's random or looking at a card that represents you happy about something or someone. I've already said that perhaps the biggest personal cross that I've borne on my shoulders, it's usually family and relationships, which is all connected. I studied enough psychiatry in my own way, some formal, but I've dealt enough with it. That and family stuff and so on and so forth. Relationships are inevitably relationships with your significant other and or others. I think are inextricably tied or connected, frequently tied with very hard knots to things that have to do with your infancy and your family relationships. But anyway, so as with almost everybody else on earth, if not everybody else on earth, relationships have been the burden of my life to the point that I went through major suicidal periods. Loneliness can be. They've done studies about how it's awfully bad for you. There's also something about being alone. Being alone and being lonely are very different. I have a very social side and I have a very meditative side, and I need my alone hermit time. But that's different from not having someone that understands you and cares for you. The relationships that I've had, I'm 51 right now, just turned 51 a little while ago, are I'm gonna say something here. It's got nothing to do with it. I was 25 years ago to seriously consider being the editor in chief of comics. So when you see your Spider-Man movies, Iron Man movies, and so on and so forth. Right now, Marvel is part of Disney, but and those blockbusters, I was considered by the top intellectuals in my field the most brilliant mind. I was told to consider becoming editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, not by Marvel, by somebody that co-founded the New York School of Visual Arts and wanted to his partners wanted to buy Marvel. Then they didn't go with that, but they wanted me to be editor-in-chief of Marvel. Well, that would mean that uh, essentially, directly or indirectly, I would decide what happens with Iron Man, not Batman, that's DC Comics, Spider-Man, X-Men, etc., etc., etc. The Avengers. That was 25 years ago. They offered me to talk on television twice. I was in the newspapers. I was signing autographs. I have a prestigious publication that nobody reads. Well, actually, they're studying it at Harvard. But 25 years ago, I left all of that behind and worked minimum wage jobs and stuff like that. I had an interlude in those years when the woman that I lived with for 7 years that we almost got married. I was never quite officially married. I was in several relationships where we considered each other husband and wife, but there's a difference when society doesn't, when the rest of society doesn't consider you husband and wife. But she was like, you gotta get a real job. You gotta get a real job. Stop doing these temp jobs. And I, she met me when I was a teacher, teaching in college for continuing education at that particular time. I've also done a touch of teaching in college for credit and American Lit, but so for 2 years I gave in and I said, okay, let me get a quote unquote real job to see if it makes her happy, but nothing would make her happy. I've got a theory that because of taboos, Freudian taboos, women have almost an ingrained won't be satisfied gene, quote unquote, if you will, in them, a chip, something inside them where they they're almost there's a subconscious thing where they'll never be totally happy, and I think it goes back to their father. But that's not the point, or not necessarily the point. But so for 2 years, I was director of programs, teacher with youth at risk, middle school and high school, and twice I was director of programs in public education. These are programs that were, the government had a federal mandate to provide alternatives for that a small percentage of students that did not fit in the system and had problems. And there were alternative schools and stuff like that. So either with an alternative school within the school board or with charter schools, I was twice director of programs, and that was the best job that I ever had. It paid a lot less than when I worked as a secretary, but and it was a lot more work. Even though being an assistant, I wasn't exactly secretary. I was assistant to an executive assistant to the chief of a large, relatively large NGO. That paid a lot more than working with kids that would call you nigger and Jew and even though it was white, but yeah, nigger, Jew, and fag, and so on and so forth. But I love the kids. They were expressing their frustration, testing their boundaries, and so on and so forth. And love the job. Paid very little, but fought with the school board all the time. I'm not going to explain at this moment why I inserted some of my bio here, but going back to the personal thing, and most people want to know want to be happy. Ultimately, they want to be good with their relationships, their work, like I said, and this thing with women that devastated me because I've had, technically speaking, I think 7 girlfriends in about 50 years, and none of the relationships have been healthy. And I just went through what you consider a breakup with my with this woman that I really, really, really care for, and I thought that for years I thought that even when we were broken up before, I thought that I had this sort of visualization of me dying in her arms, and I was old, surrounded by her love, lying down in the desert in the Southwest, in a specific place or area. So she's definitely in my heart, but I just went through something that came to a pivotal quote unquote conclusion, our conclusion yesterday, and I, I'm not sure if you'd call it a breakup. Ironically, we weren't seeing each other because I'm always attracted to women that are very complicated, that sort of like the youth at risk that I worked with, same problems, but usually older. And goes back to my background, my emotional and family background, family that I love incredibly, but had serious problems with, very, very serious problems with at times, sometimes for very long periods, and so on and so forth. So, like attracts like, as well as different attracts different. There's a combination of both. But so this morning I was frustrated, and I went back to the cards, and I said, okay. And I think that what I went with was the phrase, I want to see the card. I wanted to see the card that represented me happy about my relationships with women. I think that's what it was verbally in my mind, although deeper in me, it had to do with love and intimacy and companionship, but healthy, the perfect companionship where you understand each other and you're right for each other, and so on and so forth. It's interesting that, however, the phrase was my relationship with women. Now, if you have to think about it, my mother's a woman. The woman that I meet at the newsstand or at the grocery store is a woman. So my relationships with women, what does that mean? Does that mean my relationship with every woman on earth, with the female half of the species? Actually, I don't know if we can call it half, because thank goodness there's some movements about alternative genders, which I highly support. But if we simplify to say, half of us are female and half of us are males, or a large amount of us are females and a large amount of us are males. When you say that your relationships with women, that's very general. And that's where it gets very tricky with the wording of things, because on the one hand, like for example, when I did the tarot readings, a lot of times girls or women would say, I wanna know if it's gonna work out with Robert, and I'd say, are you sure that you want to do a tarot reading about whether or not it's gonna work out with Robert? Because ultimately, what you want is you want to be happy in your intimate relationship with the man. Or if you're open-minded with your intimate relationships with more than one man. That's a major point for me, because I don't like the term polyamory, but most people are absolutely entrenched in this finding the one person, and that also goes back to family stuff and Freudian stuff and so on and so forth. And I and a lot of other people argue that it's unhealthy. It'd be like if you were to go to a planet and they said, no, you can only have one parent, or you can only have one sibling, or you can only have one friend, and you go, why? I want to be able to have 3 or 4 good friends. you'd think it was sick. If you went to a planet where they told you you can only have one friend, you'd think this is a sick planet. But you don't think most people don't think that it's a sick planet. That everything in our society and in our soul, which I think is a conditioned thinking, tells us that you only have to have one person as far as your intimate relationships. Uh, Far on the opposite, most people think that I'm sick if I say that the healthiest thing would be that if I'm a man and I like women, or if you're a woman and you like men, that there's several in the open, all cards on the table, no pun intended with the cards, several men if you're a woman and like men, or several women if you're men and you like women. I mean, you can do this for all genders and sexual preferences, but several that are your deepest, most intimate relationships. I think that the psychological, emotional, and social benefits would be tremendous. Also for any possible children that there might be. But like I said, and I think that it's the opposite. The nuclear family, the notion of the Prince Charming or the one soulmate, which men have too, they're one princess or whatever. That notion is actually very, very harmful. But I think that it'd be, well, I'm happy that I mentioned that, and I think it's proper that I mentioned it. I think it'd be improper to focus on that, because what we want to focus on is the tarot reading. So I sort of look at it as when I was going to say, I sort of look at it as when you're choosing a card that represents you happy about someone or something, or a situation or whatnot. That when you quote unquote, when you use the quote unquote random method, which is typical of traditional tarot, you shuffle the cards, or the psychic or yourself, usually it's a spread. I focus on one card for each situation and or person and or thing, but typically it's sort of a random draw, or it's in the hands of the psychic, that the tarot card reader. The other side, I think that actually sort of is a picture of what the world brings you. So for example, if you want to be happy about your car or your work, okay, and I think it's very important to use cards for even the smallest things. Like if your printer breaks down, I recommend that you do a tarot reading and find and discover and understand the card that represents you happy about your printer. But most people are more, like I said, in terms of work and health and money and relationships. It seems to be the biggest thing, obviously. So that card that you quote unquote randomly draw that represents you happy about your printer or your soulmate is sort of what the world is giving you. If you took the opposite approach, which is that you want to choose the card that represents you happy with the printer or your soulmate or whatever, and you look at the cards and you say, this is the card that I want in this direction, turn this way. This is the card that I want, that I choose to represent me happy about the printer or the soulmate or work or whatever. It's more about your choice. One is more about going with the flow. The other method, one method is more about going with the flow. The quote unquote random method is more about going with the flow. I addressed this in at least to some extent for now, in the about page. The other method, where you actually decide, okay, this is the card that I want, is more about decision. One is more about going with the flow. The other one is more about decision. Sometimes it gets a little sometimes, more often than not, I prefer to have one card as opposed to two cards. But on occasion, I'll have two cards and I'll say, okay, this is the card that represents me happy about blah blah blah, as far as going with the flow. This is the card that represents. This other card is the card that represents me happy about blah 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 in terms of what I want to do about it. Uh, Either way, even if you choose the random method, which is actually the one that I use a little bit more frequently, but I go through my own rituals, which may be very quick or maybe very extended. But I sort of go with the quote-unquote random because that sort of well, never mind because why, but there's other times when I don't, and I say no, I want to choose the card. So and there's other stuff that I'm not going to get into quite right now in terms of, do you ever change the card? If the card represents you happy about your love life, it could stick with you for the rest of your life, or you could change it the next day. That's a bit of a large subject that I'm not going to get into now, other than to say that I used to be very much into sticking to the card for years, but I'm also open and have started to embrace a lot more where I might change the card every week or even 2 minutes later. Uh, but and it's about balance and ultimately what works. The system has to work because, like I said, the purpose of next gen tarot readings is to get yourself happy, and once you get happy, to stay happy. And happy, by happy, I don't mean we don't quite have the vocabulary for what I mean. Again, you sort of have to go to my dictionary, and even that I have some issues with. But let's say happy in the sense of not unhappy. Okay, because when we say happy, we often think smiling and joyful, and sometimes smiling and joyful is wonderful. Sometimes smiling and joyful can be tiring. You know, as I say in the back of the cards that I have about as one of the fundamental tarot things. No, one of the fundamental things about happy and not happy in my dictionary in the model and cards deck. The flip side of the card says, dude, maybe sleep is what will make you happy. It doesn't necessarily mean literal joy, but if you can't get sleep, you ain't gonna be happy. So, see what I mean? So the notion is you want to be happy. Ultimately, I'm convinced that everything in the universe needs to be well. The universe is a whole organism, and every cell in the universe needs to be well, which is something that most people say that that's impossible. There's always going to be pain and suffering in one household, let alone the whole universe. And what I say is, okay, look at a plant. What does the plant do? The plant, like any organism, aims at its well-being. And if you think that the universe is not aiming at its well-being, you're mistaken. And the Earth is part of the universe. Human society is part of the universe. And while I may be considered a fool by thinking that human society and the universe is bound necessarily to become healthy, I actually think that the conventional wisdom is foolish to assume that human society and the earth at large and the universe at large is bound to be unhealthy, because people confuse, you know, when you say, oh, how can you have pleasure without having pain? I remember when my cat was sick. I'm a dog person, and it's too complicated for me to have animals right now, although I've had a couple of women in my life that had animals, and I love dogs. But when I had cats, because my brother got cats when we were living at home, then he left and we got left with the cats. I remember one time the cat was sick, and I remember how when you're sick, or depressed. Sometimes you think, I'm never gonna get out of this. And I could tell that the cat was so sick that it seemed like it had no hope. And I remember, caressing the cat, giving it some love, and telling him verbally, I know right now you think that you're never gonna be healthy, but you will be. Now, does that sound like Robocop to you, by the way? No. That's one of the reasons why I thought, I know I'm changing from subject to subject, but it's all connected. But that's one of the reasons why I'm like, no, that's not a love relationship, Robocop. But the amazing thing, and I know this from years and years of experience, especially the last few, let's say, probably I'd say the last 9 years of experience. Which, by the way, the number 9 is I practiced, practiced, practiced. Which, if we go with the 2016 being the 9, that's sort of the major thing for the year. Or 6 is, it's a big, 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 big world. I do recommend you check out the stuff in the website. I don't have it yet. I'm working on it right now. There's only, if you go to the deck that is currently on to date that I'm doing this recording, it doesn't have, there's only one deck. It's complete in one sense because it's got 30 cards, and each card has the phrase, but it doesn't have the other material. Not only does it not have the other decks ready, but which I'm working on, but it doesn't have the other stuff that I'm working on, and I'm almost done with the first phase of it, which sort of gets a little bit more into what the phrase means. But so the 6 for this year, which is based on the 30 count, would make it this year of the year of It's a Big, 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 Big World. Which has to do with understanding that there's so many more possibilities, imagining something that you're imagining things that you wouldn't imagine, and ideally good things. Like if you're studying to be a chemist, and in your mind you think, okay, if I really make it big, I'm going to be a professor, I'm going to teach chemistry. My father did, or for example, not necessarily dreamed that, but I was a chemistry professor, or I'm going to be hired by this company, I'm going to study these drugs, and it's like, okay, there's a ridiculous example, but it's like, if you're not imagining yourself doing something with chemistry that is going to give you a Nobel Prize, or is going to cure, I don't believe that chemistry cures cancer, which is ironically one of the things that my father worked on. I believe that our shamanism, nextgen shamanism, cures cancer, and the chemistry changes. But leaving aside all that, if you're wanting to study to be a chemist, and you're visualizing your idea of, oh wow, if I could get to that point, start to imagine yourself with the Nobel Prize, or having found the cure for cancer, or having or running the biggest chemical wonderful company that you can imagine. If you didn't imagine that, you're not doing the 6. The 6, it's a big, 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 big world. There's 4 bigs in there. It's a big, 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 big world. And the visualization of something that you couldn't imagine, especially when you understand, okay, I want to visualize good things, is fundamental. So those are the two primary numbers, the 6 and the 9. For this year, if you go with this numerology, I tend to give a little bit more weight, just a touch, maybe 51% to the next gen numerology, so that'd be a 6. But certainly give it at least 49 points out of 100 to the other reading, which would be a 9. I'm quite happy with both. I practiced, and it's a big, 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 big world. But and let's again keep in mind that the flip side of this card is I leave it in their hands. I have 13. But you know what? This seems to be a good point. I'm at 49 minutes and 36 seconds. I'm going to continue this with the next recording. Hold on.